When you live 73 years, you realize one simple thing. Everything in this world changes, except people's attitudes toward things they consider junk. I know what I'm talking about. All my life I've been collecting what others would call junk and turning it into treasures. My antique store, Kronos, in downtown Williamstown, thrived for 30 years until I decided to sell the business and enjoy retirement. My fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be, but my eyes are still unmistakable in determining the value of what lies before me. My name is Heather Beardsley, and I live in a small but cozy house on the outskirts of town. Today, I sat at my old desk by the window, overlooking the garden where my daughter Pearl once played. The clock on the wall showed 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had less than 24 hours before the holiday, but I wasn't nervous. I went through the papers slowly, stacking them with the precision of a jeweler. On the table was an envelope with the original documents, my pride, my secret, and possibly my future weapon. When my old friend Edward Prigglesworth, collector and investor, had died 15 years ago, he had left me a block of shares in Penstream Pharmaceuticals. They weren't worth much then, but now they were worth over $400,000. I never told my daughter about it. Not out of greed, out of caution. I picked up an antique music box I'd restored myself, an early 19th century artwork, with mother of pearl inlays and a secret compartment that most of the owners didn't even realize they had. That's where I put the perfectly executed copies of the documents, framed so that at first glance they were indistinguishable from the originals. Pearl will appreciate this, I murmured, stroking the lid of the box. If her hubby would let her. Owen Crawford. Even saying his name mentally made my mouth water. Pearl had met him 20 years ago when she worked at a law firm. He was a young, ambitious lawyer who knew how to charm women and impress their parents. I liked him at first, educated from a good family, with a sense of humor. But after the wedding, the masks began to fall off. I went to an old dresser and pulled out a photo album. My joints ached, reminding me of the rain the weather forecasters promised for tomorrow. Pearl's birthday was the 37th in a row. I hadn't gotten an invitation for the last 10 years. This year, Owen had called me himself, a rare gesture that first surprised me, then alarmed me. "We'd like to see you at Pearl's party, Heather," he said in that professional, affectionate tone that always hid irritation. Family is family, after all. I agreed, not showing my surprise. The invitation had been preceded by years of estrangement, beginning after one unpleasant family meeting when I'd had the misfortune to voice my opinion of Owen's financial decisions. He was never good at taking criticism, especially from a woman he considered old-fashioned and backward. I looked at the pictures. Here was Pearl as a child, with curly hair and dimpled cheeks. Here was her graduation from university. Here was her wedding to Owen. In this picture, she was looking at him with an adoration I'd never seen in her gaze on me. It hurts when your only daughter chooses another man over you. It hurts even more when that person gradually distances her from you. "You deserve better, Pearl," I whispered, fingering the photograph. My relationship with my brother-in-law had finally soured 3 years ago, when I'd given my grandchildren, twins Aiden and Emma, their great-grandfather's collectible stamps. Owen called them useless dust and storage expenses right in front of the kids. I later learned that the stamps were gone, probably sold, though Owen claimed he had just put them away somewhere. I've never forgiven him for that. Not so much because of the stamps, but because of how easily he destroyed the intergenerational connection embodied in those little pieces of history. At my age, a lot of people think about inheritance, about what they'll leave behind. I did too. But the more I watched Owen manage the family finances, always with risky investments and ostentatious luxury, the less I wanted my inheritance to fall into his hands. The grandchildren were the ones who deserved my care. They were 16 now, and to my relief, they looked more like me than their father, especially Aiden, who could listen to me talk for hours about the provenance of various antiques. I set the album aside and returned to the jewelry box. Pearl had loved music boxes as a child. She had a collection 27 of them, each with a different tune. Owen had made her get rid of them after the wedding. "They take up too much space, dear," he said at the time. I still remember the look on Pearl's face when she gave me that collection for safekeeping. She said she'd take it when they had a bigger house, but she never did. I started the mechanism of the box, and the melody of Beethoven's To Elise filled the room. The delicate sound of the antique mechanism, which I had restored with my own hands, was soothing. I wondered if Pearl would recognize the tune. It had been her favorite box as a child. I carefully placed the copies of the documents in the secret compartment of the box, first placing them in a protective plastic envelope. Even if Owen opened the box, it was unlikely he'd discover the compartment. That would require a secret, and secrets are what I'm best at. I'd hidden the originals in the safe behind the painting and old-fashioned solution, but reliable. I wasn't going to part with them, at least not until I saw Owen's reaction to my gift. Over the years, I'd learned one important thing. Owen Crawford despises anything he can't immediately convert into money or status. Antiques to him are just old things, unless, of course, they can be sold at a profit. I wrapped the box in exquisite paper and tied it with a silk ribbon. The gift looked elegant, as befitted something with history. Pearl had always appreciated such gestures. I hoped the years of living with Owen hadn't completely erased that trait from her. Evening was slowly descending on Williamstown. From my window, I could see the lights on in the neighborhood homes, the lights on as people came home from work. I had once had the same rhythm, closing up the store, coming home where little Pearl was waiting for me. After the death of my husband, who left early, a heart attack at 45, my daughter and I lived alone. I tried to give her all I could, working late, saving money for her education. Pearl was a bright girl, got a law degree, got a job at a good firm. I was proud of her. And then Owen came along. I remember the first time I met him, a dinner at a restaurant where he talked more about himself than he listened to anyone else. But at the time, I chalked it up to excitement. Besides, Pearl looked so happy. I didn't want to cloud her joy with my doubts. Maybe I should have. A phone call interrupted my thoughts. Aiden. "Hi, Grandma." His voice sounded muffled, like he was speaking from a room where someone could overhear. "Are you coming tomorrow?" "Of course, darling. I've already prepared a present for your mom." "Oh, cool." He was obviously excited. "I missed you. Dad said you'd be there." "I'm officially invited." I didn't bother clarifying that the invitation had come from Owen, not Pearl. "Okay." He was quiet for a moment. "You know, Mom missed me too. She just—" "I know, honey. No need to explain." I felt energized after the short conversation with my grandson. It was worth going to this party for Aiden and Emma, even if I had to put up with Owen's coldness and Pearl's strained politeness. I checked the gift again. The box was perfect. Copies of the documents were safely tucked away in a secret compartment, and the mechanism worked perfectly. Tomorrow, I'd see Owen once again show his disdain for something he didn't think had value. But this time, I'll be ready. This time, I'll teach him a lesson he won't soon forget. Night had fallen on the city. I closed the curtains and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow promised to be interesting. Though I'd long ago stopped expecting the warmth of family gatherings, this one could be special. I smiled at my thoughts, imagining Owen's face when he realized what he'd thrown away. As for the original documents, they're safe, my safety, and as long as they stay in my possession, I remain in control of the situation. No matter what happens tomorrow, I have the upper hand. My daughter's house always reminded me of a page from a glossy magazine, perfect but lifeless. I stopped at the entrance, adjusted my scarf, and gripped the gift box tighter in my hands. The box was securely wrapped, and I hoped the moment of its delivery would come in an appropriate setting. I rang the doorbell. Aiden opened the door, and his face lit up with genuine joy. Grandma! He hugged me with the enthusiasm that only teenagers can show when they're not ashamed of their feelings. I'm so glad you came. I hugged him back, noting how much he had grown in the last few months. My grandson was now a head taller than me. Where is your sister? I asked as I entered the spacious hallway. Emma's helping Mom with something in the kitchen, he answered, taking my coat. The guests are already gathering in the living room. Come on, I'll walk you out. The house was decorated in the kind of modern style that Owen considered a sign of good taste: minimalism, neutral tones, designer furniture that wasn't meant for comfort. There were abstract paintings on the walls, which I was sure Owen bought not because he liked them, but because their artists were on trend. When we entered the living room, I immediately felt the atmosphere change. Conversations became quieter, and some of the guests cast curious glances at me. Apparently, my appearance at the family party after all these years was a surprise to them. Heather. Owen approached me first, his face the fake smile he used in court when he wanted to impress a jury. How nice of you to be able to come. Thank you for the invitation, Owen, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. Where's Pearl? She'll be joining us soon. He glanced at the box in my hands. Let me take your things. I clutched the gift tighter to me. Don't worry, I can handle it myself. His smile became strained, but he nodded and backed away, turning to the other guests. I noticed him whisper something to a passing waiter, nodding in my direction. Typical Owen, always in control, even in his own home at his wife's party. I looked around the room. There were about 20 people gathered, mostly Owen and Pearl's co-workers, a few family friends I barely knew. In the corner, I spotted Lauren Exley, an old friend of Pearl's from high school, and headed over to her, placing my gift carefully on the small table near the entrance. Heather! Lauren hugged me with genuine warmth. I haven't seen you in ages. How are you doing? Not bad for an old lady, I smiled, pleased to see a familiar face. And you're still as beautiful as ever. Lauren laughed. Flattery suits you. I'm glad you're here. Pearl will be happy. I doubted the last statement, but I remained silent. Lauren has always been an optimist. How are things with you and her? I asked quietly. Do you still talk to her? Not as much as I used to, Lauren admitted, glancing across the room to where Owen was talking to a group of men in expensive suits. She's got a lot of work to do. You know how it is? I did. Owen had a habit of gradually cutting off from Pearl those he felt had too much influence over her. Lauren, with her independent views and sharp tongue, was probably on that list. At that moment, Pearl entered the room, accompanied by Emma. My daughter looked elegant in a dark blue dress, her hair arranged in an elaborate style. She had changed in the time we hadn't seen each other. There were new wrinkles around her eyes, her posture more tense, but she was still beautiful. Our gazes met across the room, and for a moment I saw a mixture of emotions in her eyes: surprise, uncertainty, maybe even a glimmer of joy. But the moment was short-lived. She quickly pulled herself together and headed toward me. Mom, she hugged me lightly, keeping her distance. Thank you for coming. Happy birthday, dear. I squeezed her hand lightly. It's good to see you. Pearl nodded, her smile polite but not reaching her eyes. I hope you're comfortably settled in. I have other guests to greet. And she stepped away, leaving me with Lauren. I suppressed a sigh. Typical Pearl of recent years, always maintaining decorum, even if it meant keeping her own mother at a distance. Emma came up to me as soon as Pearl stepped away. Grandmother. She hugged me with a sincerity her mother lacked. I'm so glad to see you. You have to tell me about that book you recommended last time. I read it. I smiled. Emma had inherited my love of reading and history. Unlike her brother, who was more practical, she saw beauty in old things and the stories they held. Of course, dear. Let's find a quiet corner. We settled down on a small sofa in the corner of the room. Emma began talking about a book, a historical novel set in the Victorian era. Her enthusiasm warmed my heart. At least all is not lost if my grandchildren can still appreciate the depth and complexity of the past. Our conversation was interrupted by Owen, who approached with 2 glasses of champagne. Emma, dear, please help your mother with her guests, he said, holding out one of the glasses to me. Heather, would you like to join us in our discussion about real estate? Some of our guests are thinking about buying antique homes. I suspected it was just a way to separate me from my granddaughter, but I decided to play by his rules. My pleasure, Owen. I spent the next hour talking to a group of Owen's fellow lawyers and financial advisors who seemed more interested in the opportunity to profit from old buildings than in their history or architectural value. I tried to be polite, but I felt like I was speaking a different language. What's your opinion about preserving the historic appearance of such buildings, Mrs. Beardsley? Asked one of the guests, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit. I think history deserves respect, I replied. Of course, modernization is necessary, but not at the cost of destroying the soul of the building. Owen, standing next to me, let out a short laugh. That's a very romantic approach, Heather. But as a rule, investors are more interested in return on investment than in preserving the, how did you put it? The soul of the building? Several of the guests laughed, and I felt the color rush to my face. Without an understanding of history, Owen, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past, I said calmly. And that doesn't just apply to buildings. Our gazes met, and for a moment I saw a flash of irritation behind his smug smile. He hadn't expected me to fight back. Pearl chose that moment to announce the start of dinner, and the guests began to move into the dining room. I took the opportunity to step away from Owen and his company and pick up my gift from the table. The dining room was decorated as impeccably as the rest of the house. The long table was set with china and silver, with elegant floral arrangements in the center. I noticed that I had a seat far away from Pearl and Owen, between 2 strangers. I placed the gift box beside me on the floor, deciding to wait for a more appropriate moment to present it. Dinner followed a strict protocol. The dishes succeeded each other, each perfectly cooked, but tasteless in my opinion. Conversation at the table revolved around work, real estate, and the latest fashions. I listened, sometimes nodding, but mostly watching my daughter. Pearl sat at the head of the table, next to Owen. She smiled and kept the conversation going, but I noticed the tension in her posture, the way she often glanced at her husband, as if testing his reaction to her words. This was not the Pearl I remembered, a lively, bold girl with her own opinions and a ringing laugh. After the main course, Owen stood up with a glass in his hand. Friends, I'd like to toast my beautiful wife. His voice filled the room. 37 years, and she's only getting more beautiful and smarter every day. The guests applauded, and Pearl blushed slightly. I noticed she wasn't looking at me. And I'm glad we have Heather with us today, Owen continued, turning everyone's attention back to me. Pearl's mother and grandmother to our wonderful children. We're glad you were able to join us, Heather, despite the difficult circumstances of the past few years. It was said with a smile, but I sensed an undercurrent of reproach in his words. He was reminding everyone that I was the outsider, the one who didn't fit into their perfect family picture. I raised my glass and nodded, keeping a nonchalant expression on my face. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing his words hurt me. After dinner, the guests returned to the living room for dessert and coffee. Aiden found me among the guests and asked quietly, "How are you, Grandma? Dad hasn't been too, you know?" "Don't worry about me, dear." I squeezed his hand lightly. "It's not the first time I've dealt with people who think they're smarter than everyone else." Aiden grinned. He'd gotten worse lately, especially since he'd been passed over for a promotion. "Really?" That was news to me. Yeah, the managing partner position had gone to someone new. Dad's been walking around like a cloud for a week. I can see why Owen suddenly decided to invite me. He needed to demonstrate that he was in control of every aspect of his life, including his complicated family relationships, to show that he was generous and able to connect even with his unloved mother-in-law. Dessert was served with as much pomp as the main course. I watched Pearl interact with the guests, always with the perfect smile, always with the right words. But there was something mechanical about her, like she was playing a role written for her by someone else. Lauren came over to me when most of the guests had scattered around the living room with glasses and dessert plates. "What did you think of the evening?" she asked with a touch of irony. "Exactly what I expected," I replied. "A perfect facade with nothing behind it." Lauren nodded. "You know, sometimes I miss the old Pearl, the one who could laugh until she cried at a stupid joke and dance barefoot in the rain." "Me too." My gaze found my daughter in the crowd of guests. She was standing next to Owen, her hand on his elbow, her posture as perfect as a mannequin in an expensive store window. "But I'm afraid that Pearl is long gone." "I don't know." Lauren looked at her friend thoughtfully. "Sometimes, when Owen isn't around, I see glimpses of the old Pearl, especially when she talks about her children or her work at the Women's Rights Foundation." "She works for the foundation?" That was news to me, too. "Yeah, for about 2 years now. Owen doesn't approve, of course. He thinks it's a waste of time. But Pearl insisted, which surprised me. Interesting. So my daughter had retained some of her independence after all. That gave me hope. The evening went on. I tried to stay out of Owen's way, spending time with my grandchildren, Lauren, and the other guests, who seemed genuinely interested in talking about something other than money and status. My gift was still waiting to be delivered. Emma found me as I stood at the window, watching the garden lit by decorative lanterns. "Grandma, Mom is going to open the presents after everyone has tasted dessert. Will you give me yours to put with the others?" I looked at the box I was still holding on to and hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to hand the gift over in person, to see Pearl's reaction when she opened the box. But perhaps it would be better if she opened it among the other gifts, with less attention to our interaction. "Of course, dear." I handed her the box. "Just please make sure she sees it." Emma nodded and carried the gift away. I went back to watching the garden, thinking about what would happen next. The plan had been set in motion, and now all I had to do was wait to see how it unfolded. Gradually, the atmosphere of the evening became more relaxed. The guests, full and drunk, were less formal. Someone started dancing to the music pouring from invisible speakers. I spotted Aiden talking to a girl about his age, the daughter of one of Owen's co-workers, judging by their resemblance. They were laughing, and it was real laughter, not the polite imitation that adults exchanged. Pearl came up to me for the first time all evening after our brief greeting. "Are you all right, Mother?" she asked with a touch of real concern in her voice. "Of course I am, dear. It's a lovely evening." I smiled at her. "You look happy." Pearl looked surprised for a moment, as if she hadn't expected such a comment. "Yeah, yeah, I'm fine," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to the kids." "Just the kids?" I couldn't resist asking. Pearl looked away. "For me too, of course. It's just, you know how complicated it is." "I know." I touched her arm gently. but sometimes you can overcome them if you really want to. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of longing, doubt, and maybe fear. Mom, she began, but at that moment Owen appeared beside her, as if sensing that his wife was having a dangerously frank conversation. Darling, the guests are waiting for you to open the presents. He put his hand on her shoulder, squeezing lightly, a gesture that looked loving, but in which I saw control. Pearl nodded, her face once again a mask of politeness. Of course. We'll talk later, Mom. I knew this conversation wasn't going to happen. Owen would take care of it. But that was okay. I had another way to get through to my daughter. A way that was now lying amongst the other gifts waiting to be given. The guests gradually gathered in the center of the living room, forming a semicircle around the chair where Pearl sat. A mountain of colorful boxes and packages grew on a small table beside her. Owen stood behind his wife's chair with his hands on her shoulders, a possessive gesture that always annoyed me. I watched them from across the room, keeping a little apart from the main group of guests. It's time for presents, Owen announced with the kind of feigned solemnity he used at corporate events. My beautiful wife deserves only the best. The guests applauded, and Pearl smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned to recognize as insincere, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Owen began handing her gifts one by one. An expensive scarf from a coworker, a set of high-end cosmetics from a friend, exquisite wine from a private winery from Owen's partners. Pearl opened each gift with rehearsed exclamations of delight, thanked the givers, and stacked the items neatly beside her. It looked like a well-choreographed performance where everyone knew their role. I watched as my gift-a-box wrapped in vintage paper with a silk ribbon slowly approached Pearl's hands as the stack of gifts dwindled. My fingers involuntarily clenched on the glass I was holding. The moment of truth was approaching. And this is from your mother, Owen said, handing Pearl my box. I noticed his eyebrows furrow slightly as he felt the weight of the gift. Pearl accepted the box and began to carefully unwrap the wrapping. I watched her fingers freeze for a moment as she touched the silk ribbon she'd always loved texture. As kids, we could spend hours walking through a fabric store, just touching different materials. As she removed the packaging, she saw the box and froze for a moment. Her eyes widened, and I noticed her catch her breath. I recognized it. This is, she began, running her fingers over the mother-of-pearl inlays. One of your old music boxes, I finished, stepping forward. I restored it for you. Pearl looked up at me, and something flashed in her gaze, an echo of the girl who had once collected music boxes and believed in magic. Is she playing? She asked quietly. Try it, I suggested, coming closer. Pearl gently turned the gold key on the side of the box. The mechanism clicked, and the gentle sounds of To Elise filled the room. The guests fell silent, listening. I saw my daughter's face soften, her shoulders slump, as if she had momentarily forgotten her posture. It was my favorite, she whispered, looking at the box with genuine tenderness. I smiled. In that moment, there was a connection between us, a thin, fragile thread of understanding that had existed before Owen had come into our lives. But the moment was short-lived. Owen leaned over, examining the box with an expression I knew well, a mixture of skepticism and poorly concealed disdain. It's old stuff, isn't it? He held out his hand. May I see it? Pearl reluctantly handed it to him. I saw her fingers linger on the polished wood for a moment, as if unwilling to part with it. Owen turned the box in his hands, opening and closing the lid, feeling the carvings. Not bad work for its time, he said in that condescending tone he used when talking about things he didn't understand. But all these antique things, they collect so much dust. and they take up space. It's not just a thing, Owen, Pearl said, and there was a note of irritation in her voice that surprised me. It's part of my childhood. Of course it is, dear. He patted her on the shoulder as if he were soothing a cranky child. But we have enough souvenirs. He turned the box again, and I noticed his fingers fumbling with the edge of the secret compartment. For a moment I held my breath, thinking he'd discover it, but Owen was too busy showing off his superiority to notice the details. Well, that's an interesting choice of gift, Heather, he said, addressing me with the fake politeness that always masked mockery. Very nostalgic. I thought Pearl would appreciate it, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She'd always loved beautiful things with a story. Yes, as a child, Owen grinned. But we all grow out of our childhood hobbies, don't we? I noticed Pearl's face tense, and Aiden and Emma, who were standing off to the side, exchanged concerned glances. They knew where this was going. We all did. Owen, let's get back to the rest of the presents, Pearl suggested, reaching into the box. But Owen didn't seem to hear her. He continued to study the box, his face slowly taking on an expression I'd seen many times before, the expression of a man determined to show his power. You know, friends, he said to the guests, many of whom were already looking uncomfortable. I've always told Pearl that our house is not a museum. We live in the 21st century, don't we? Several of the guests nodded uncertainly, clearly not understanding what he was getting at. And in this century, Owen continued playing with the box, we have to make room for new things, new ideas, not cling to the past. Owen, Pearl's voice became tense. I'd like to keep the box. Why, darling? He raised his eyebrows. Would you like it to sit dusty on a shelf? Or in a box in the attic, like all those other, what are they, trinkets? I saw Pearl's face go pale. He was talking about her collection of music boxes, which she'd collected over the years and which Owen had made her put away shortly after they'd married. It was a gift from my mother, Pearl said quietly but firmly. A gift, Owen repeated, his smile hard. Or junk. The living room fell into an awkward silence. I could see some of the guests looking away, wishing they were anywhere but here. Lauren threw Owen a look of blatant contempt. Aiden took a step forward as if he were going to intervene, but Emma held up a hand. Owen, please. Pearl's voice trembled. Let's not, I just want to understand. He interrupted her. Why do we need things that have no practical value? Things that only take up space and remind us of times that are long gone? He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a challenge. He knew he was hurting me, knew that every word he said was like a knife to my heart, and he relished it. Beauty and memories have value too, Owen, I said calmly, though I was seething inside. Not everything is measured by practicality. A philosophical approach, he grinned. That's very you, Heather, but I prefer specifics. And then, to my horror and secret satisfaction at the same time, Owen did something I'd hoped he wouldn't. He lifted the box higher for all to see and said loudly, clearly, with that smug confidence of a man who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. This is garbage, my friends. He turned to Pearl. And I will not have our house turned into a dumping ground for old things. With these words, he went to the large decorative trash can at the entrance to the living room, and before anyone could react, he tossed the box into it defiantly. The sound of it hitting the metal bottom of the urn echoed through the hushed room. Owen! Pearl exclaimed, jumping up from her chair. Her face was contorted with shock and anger. How could you? Owen turned to her with an expression of feigned surprise. What is it, dear? It's just an old jewelry box. It was a gift from my mother. A gift we don't need, he said, his voice hard. I'm tired of our house being turned into a museum of old things just because someone has a sentimental attachment to the past. Pearl looked at him with an expression as if she were seeing him for the first time. Then she looked at me, and I saw a mixture of shame and pleading forgiveness in her eyes. I stood still, outwardly calm, though my emotions raged inside. Part of me wanted to go to the trash can, pull out the box, and throw it at Owen's smug face. The other part, the part that had planned the whole thing, was satisfied. He'd done exactly what I'd hoped he'd do, caught in the trap of his own arrogance and disdain. The guests began to glance around awkwardly. Someone coughed. The tension in the air could have been cut with a knife. Yeah, I think we should get on with the presents, Pearl finally said, trying to salvage the situation. Her voice sounded taut, like a string ready to burst. Owen seemed to realize only now that he had gone too far in front of witnesses. His face lost its smug expression for a moment, and he looked around the room, gauging the reaction of his guests. Of course, darling, he said, returning to his role of loving husband. I just wanted to make room for the really valuable gifts. Aiden, unable to stand it, muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, God, what a jerk. Owen cast a sharp glance at him, but decided not to make another scene. Pearl mechanically went back to opening the remaining presents, but the joy had clearly left her. She smiled and thanked the givers, but her eyes were empty and her hands trembled slightly. I stepped back to the window, needing space to gather my thoughts. Lauren joined me a few minutes later. That was impressive, she said quietly. Even for Owen. He's always been like that, I replied, looking out the window at the dark garden. He's just usually better at hiding it. Lauren shook her head. Poor Pearl. I never understood why she stayed with him. Habit, I said bitterly. Sometimes people wear masks for so long that they forget their real face. Lauren looked at me carefully. Are you okay, Heather? That gift obviously meant a lot to you. It did, I agreed, but not in the way Owen thought it did. She frowned, not understanding, but I didn't explain. Instead, I smiled at her and squeezed her hand lightly. You're a good friend, Lauren. I'm glad Pearl still has you in her life. Gradually, the party regained its rhythm, though the atmosphere remained taut. Owen cheered defiantly, as if trying to erase the awkwardness he had created. Pearl held her dignity, but I saw her glance occasionally at the urn where the box lay. I decided it was time to leave. My presence was only adding to the tension, and besides, the first part of my plan was done. I found Aiden and Emma to say goodbye. Are you leaving already, Grandma? Aiden asked with disappointment. Yes, honey. I think I've had enough fun today. I'm sorry about Daddy, Emma whispered, hugging me. He shouldn't have done that to your present. Don't worry about it. I stroked her hair. Sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem. I said goodbye to Pearl, who looked both embarrassed and upset. Mom, I'm so sorry about... She nodded toward the urn. Don't apologize for your husband, Pearl, I said quietly. It was never your responsibility. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of gratitude and concern. I'll call you tomorrow, she promised. I nodded, knowing that she probably wouldn't keep her promise. Not because she didn't want to, but because Owen would find a way to get in the way. Owen was thankfully busy talking to some important guest, so I didn't have to say goodbye to him. I left the house quietly, breathing in the cool evening air with relief. On the way home, I pondered the evening's events. Owen had behaved even worse than I'd expected, publicly humiliating not only me, but his own wife as well. But, in a way, it played to my advantage. The more egregious his behavior was, the greater his shock would be when he learned the truth about the box. I smiled at my thoughts. The box was now in the trash can, But that was only the first part of my plan. The second part would begin in a few days, when I would inform Pearl of exactly what Owen had thrown away in a fit of arrogance. As I reached home, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel impotent rage after dealing with Owen, because now I had a plan, and the first act of that plan had gone exactly as planned. The original documents were safely hidden in my safe, and the copies that now rested in the trash garbage can at Owen's house would soon become a source of panic and despair for him, and that would only be the beginning. I didn't feel regret, only anticipation. 3 days I spent waiting. 3 days during which I hadn't received a single call from Pearl, even though she'd promised to call the day after the party. It didn't surprise me. I knew that either Owen had convinced her not to contact me, or she herself was too embarrassed by his behavior to work up the courage to talk. I did the usual things these days: reading, working in the garden, sorting through boxes of old photographs. But my thoughts kept returning to the box Owen had thrown away and the documents hidden in it. It was time to start the next phase of the plan. On the fourth day after Pearl's birthday, I decided to act. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, a time when Owen was usually already in the office and Pearl was most likely home alone. I picked up the phone and dialed my daughter's number, preparing for the conversation that was going to change everything. The phone took a long time to ring, and I was already thinking Pearl wouldn't answer when I heard her voice. "Mom?" She sounded surprised, perhaps even wary. "Good morning, dear," I said as casually as possible. "How are you?" "Yeah, fine." I paused. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I had a lot to do after the party." "Of course I understand," I replied, knowing full well it was an excuse. "I didn't want to bother you. I just wanted to see how you were doing." There was another pause. I could almost see Pearl fidgeting nervously with the telephone cord, a habit from her childhood, though now, of course, she had a cordless receiver. "Mom, about what happened to your present," she began uncertainly. "Oh, don't worry about that," I interrupted her with feigned ease. "It's just an old jewelry box, although I have to admit, I'm a little sorry about that. Owen shouldn't have done that." I heard a note of real irritation in her voice. It was unacceptable? Well, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the key moment of the conversation. "I just hope the box is still somewhere in the house. I'd hate to see whatever documents were in it end up in a landfill." "Papers?" Pearl asked, and her voice changed instantly, tense, interested. "What papers? Oh, didn't you know?" I tried to make my voice sound surprised. "There was a secret compartment in the box. I put in there copies of the stock deeds for Penstream Pharmaceuticals. No big deal. I just wanted to surprise you." "Stock?" Pearl was almost whispering. "What stock?" "The ones Edward Prigglesworth left me. You remember him? An old friend of mine, a collector. He died about 15 years ago and left me a block of stock. They weren't worth much then, but now," I paused for effect, "now they're valued at about $400,000. I heard Pearl draw in air sharply. "400,000?" Her voice trembled. "And these documents were in the box?" "Yes, copies," I confirmed. "I thought it would be a nice surprise, a music box with a little financial bonus inside. You know, like in detective novels." "Mom?" Pearl's voice turned serious. "Owen threw the box away. It's in the garbage." "Yes, I saw it," I said calmly. "But maybe it's still there, in that decorative urn?" "No." Pearl sounded almost desperate. "The trash was taken out the next day, the morning after the party." "Oh," I faked disappointment. "That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Pearl almost shrieked. "Mom, it's a disaster. $400,000. "Well, technically, they were just copies of documents," I clarified. "But it's still a shame. I thought you and Owen could have used that money, especially since Owen got passed over for a promotion. How did I know about the promotion? Aiden mentioned it at the party, a little detail that should have added salt to Owen's wound. How did you? Pearl started to say, but cut herself short. It doesn't matter. Mother, are you sure about the stocks? Are they really worth that much? Absolutely, I confirmed. Penstream has shown tremendous growth in recent years. They've had some kind of breakthrough in diabetes drugs, if I remember correctly. I could hear Pearl breathing heavily on the other end of the line. I imagined her frantically trying to figure out what to do. Mom, do you have the original documents? Do you have them? She finally asked. Of course, I replied. I would never put the originals in a gift. That would be irresponsible. Pearl made a sound like a mixture of relief and annoyance. Then it's not so bad, she said. You have the originals. Yes, but I wanted you to have the copies, I said with feigned regret. Like a gift. I'm getting older, Pearl, and I wanted to start passing on my assets to you little by little. I understand. Her voice was a mixture of gratitude and concern. That's very generous of you, Mother. But maybe we could, I don't know, meet and discuss it? Maybe you could bring the originals and we could. Of course, dear, I agreed. But now's not a good time. I'm scheduled to visit Sister Martha next week, remember? I'll be gone for 2 weeks. That was a lie. I had no plans to go to my sister's, but I needed the time to give Owen a proper thrashing. Oh, Pearl's disappointment was almost palpable. I forgot about your trip. We can discuss it when I get back, I suggested. Don't worry, the documents are safe. Yes, of course, her voice sounded strained. Mom, I have to go. I have a meeting scheduled. Of course, dear. I'll talk to you later. Pearl said goodbye and hung up so quickly that I had no doubt she was in a hurry to break the news to Owen. I put the phone away and smiled. The seeds had been sown. Now I had to wait for them to sprout panic and despair. I didn't call again that afternoon, giving Pearl and Owen time to realize the situation. Instead, I busied myself with the garden, pruning the rose bushes with particular gusto. Each cut, dry shoot seemed like a symbol. It was my way of cutting back the lies and manipulations Owen had entangled my daughter with. In the evening, Aiden called. Grandma, his voice sounded worried. What's going on? Dad's freaking out about some box and papers. Oh, honey, I tried to keep my voice innocent. It's just a little misunderstanding. The box your father threw away had copies of the stock deeds in it. Stocks? Aiden whistled. Valuable? Valuable enough, I confirmed. But don't worry, I have the originals. Then why was Dad in such a panic? Aiden asked with a curiosity that I could hear the satisfaction in. He had everyone looking for that box. He'd even gone into the trash cans. I pictured the image of the impeccable Owen Crawford rummaging through the trash, and I couldn't help but smile. I think he's uncomfortable knowing he threw away something valuable, I said. Your father always prided himself on his financial acumen. He's furious, Aiden said, with a kind of grim satisfaction. I'd never seen him like that. He was yelling at Mom, accusing her of not telling him about the documents. I frowned. This was what I didn't want, for Pearl to suffer Owen's wrath. Your mom didn't know about the documents, I said firmly. I hadn't told anyone about them until today. That's what I thought, Aiden replied. I told him it wasn't fair to blame my mom. He yelled at me, too. I'm sorry, honey, I said sincerely. I didn't mean to cause trouble for you or your mom. It's okay, Grandma. Aiden's voice took on a note I hadn't heard before. Adult, determined. Maybe it's good for Daddy to worry a little. He's too used to everything going according to his plan. I felt proud of my grandson. He had grown into a strong young man, able to see the situation clearly despite his father's manipulations. Be careful, Aiden, I warned. Your father doesn't like his authority to be questioned. I know, he replied, but I'm not a child anymore, and I'm not going to let him bully Mom or Emma. We talked some more, and I learned that Owen had organized a real search operation, calling the garbage company, trying to find out where the garbage was being taken from their neighborhood, even offering money to get access to the dump. He said he'd find that box no matter what it took, Aiden reported. I've never seen him so obsessed. After talking to my grandson, I felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, my plan was working even better than I'd expected. Owen was panicked, his self-confidence shaken. On the other hand, I didn't want Pearl or the kids to suffer from his anger. But perhaps it was necessary. Sometimes you have to open up a boil for healing to begin. Pearl had lived under her husband's shadow for too long, letting him control every aspect of her life. Maybe this crisis would finally show her Owen's true colors. The next morning, I was awakened by a phone call. It was only 7 o'clock, and I was surprised to see Owen's name on the screen. He never called me, preferring to communicate through Pearl if necessary. I decided not to pick up the phone right away, to let him be nervous. After the fifth ring, I finally answered, trying to make my voice sound sleepy. Hello? Heather? Owen's voice sounded strained, but he was clearly trying to be polite. I apologize for calling early, but I need to talk to you urgently. Owen? I pretended to be surprised. What's wrong? Pearl told me about the documents that were in the box, he said, getting straight to the point. Was it true? Was there really $400,000 worth of stock in there? Copies of the documents, I clarified. Yes, it's true. Why? I heard him take a deep breath, clearly struggling with irritation. Heather, why didn't you tell me this when you gave me the box? Why would you hide such important information? I wasn't, I answered calmly. I wanted it to be a surprise. Isn't that what a gift is all about? Surprise? His voice rose an octave. You hid $400,000 worth of documents in an old jewelry box without telling anyone? They were copies, Owen, I reminded him. I have the originals. And yes, I thought it would be a pleasant surprise if Pearl opened the box and found something more valuable inside than just a mechanism that played a tune. But I guess she didn't have time to explore the gift properly, because he cut himself off, clearly unwilling to admit that he'd thrown the box away. We can't find the box, Heather. It's gone. Missing? I asked with feigned surprise. How is that possible? There was a long pause. I could almost see Owen struggling with himself, unwilling to admit his mistake. It was accidentally thrown away, he finally said, choosing his words carefully. A misunderstanding. Oh, I tried to keep my voice neutral. That's a shame. Yes, very unfortunate, he agreed, and I could hear the falseness in his voice. But luckily, you have the original documents, right? Of course, I confirmed. I would never give away the only copies of such important papers. Great! The relief in his voice was almost comical. Then perhaps we could meet, and you could give those documents to Pearl, considering it was your gift to her? I'd love to, Owen, I said. But as I told Pearl, I have a trip planned to visit my sister. I'll be away for 2 weeks. We can discuss it when I get back. 2 weeks? He couldn't hide his disappointment. But this is an important issue, Heather. $400,000 is a lot of money. Couldn't it be settled before you left? I'm afraid not. I allowed myself a touch of pleasure. I have a very busy schedule before I leave. But don't worry, the paperwork's not going anywhere. I could hear Owen breathing heavily into the phone. He was clearly fighting the urge to insist, or even demand that I change my plans. But even in his current state, he realized that doing so would only push me away. All right, he said at last, with ill-concealed irritation. Then we'll wait for your return. But please take care of these documents. They're very valuable. Oh, I know, I assured him. They're perfectly safe, believe me. After talking to Owen, I felt a strange satisfaction. For the first time in all the years I'd known him, he spoke to me as an equal, even with a touch of respect. Even if it was due to fear of losing the money, it was still a small victory. Emma called in the afternoon, and from her, I learned even more details about Owen's panic. He was up all night, Grandma, she said. He called the garbage company, trying to find out if there was any way to track our trash to the dump. They said it was impossible, that tons of trash was already mixed and tamped down. That sounds unpleasant, I said, trying to make my voice express sympathy rather than satisfaction. He even wanted to hire people to dig the dump, Emma continued, but they explained to him that it was illegal and dangerous. Then he yelled at Mom, accusing her of not examining the box properly before he threw it away. But he was the one who threw it away without giving her a chance to even examine it properly, I pointed out. Exactly, Emma exclaimed. That's what Mom said too. And you know what? They had a fight. A real fight. I'd never seen Mom stand up to Dad like that before. I was both relieved and dismayed at the same time. On the one hand, I was glad Pearl was finally standing up to Owen's manipulations. On the other hand, I was worried that this fight might escalate into something more serious. Is your mom okay? I asked. Yeah, Emma answered after a short pause. She's different, more determined. After the fight, she left, said she needed to get some air. Didn't come back until late at night. That was unusual for Pearl. Usually after conflicts with Owen, she'd try to smooth things over, not walk away. What about Owen? I asked. Oh, he's pissed, Emma said, and I could hear a note of grim satisfaction in her voice, similar to Aiden's, especially after he couldn't find the box. He'd even contacted some private investigator, to help him track down the garbage truck and find our particular shipment. And that's possible? I asked, suddenly concerned. I hadn't expected Owen to go that far. No, of course not, Emma replied. The detective had told him that the chances of finding the box were practically nil, especially since it's been days. But Dad's not giving up. He's obsessed with that money. After talking to Emma, I spent the rest of the day thinking about the situation. My plan was working even better than I expected. Owen was panicked, his self-confidence was shaken, and, most importantly, Pearl was beginning to resist his control. But I didn't expect Owen to mount such an active search operation. That could have complicated the situation. However, the chances of him finding the box were really minimal. The next 2 days were relatively quiet. Neither Pearl nor Owen called, though Aiden kept me informed regularly. The search for the box continued, but to no avail. Owen was becoming increasingly irritable and tense. On the third day after my conversation with Pearl, the phone rang again. This time it was her. Mom, her voice sounded tired but strangely determined. We need to talk about the papers. Owen, he's not finding his place. I understand, I said calmly. But, as I said, I'm leaving for Martha's. We can discuss this when I get back. It's not just the papers, Pearl continued. It's the situation. It's clarified things for me, about our life, about my marriage. I held my breath. Was my plan working even better than I expected? Was Pearl finally beginning to see her husband's true colors? What do you mean, dear? I asked cautiously. Yeah, I can't talk about it over the phone, Pearl replied. But I want to meet you before you leave. It's important. I thought about it. On the one hand, I wanted Owen to suffer longer. On the other, if Pearl was really starting to reevaluate her marriage, I had to support her. Okay, I agreed. We can meet tomorrow, but just you and me, without Owen. Sure, Pearl said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I'll come to your place at 11 if that's convenient. We made the appointment, and I hung up the phone with a feeling that things were starting to go in an unpredictable direction. But one thing was clear. The box Owen had so contemptuously thrown away had been the catalyst for change in their family, and I couldn't help but feel gratified that my plan was beginning to bear fruit, albeit not quite in the way I'd expected. Owen was in a panic, trying to find what he'd thrown away. Pearl was beginning to see her husband's true colors, and I finally felt like I had control of the situation back in my hands. I decided to walk to the Riverbend Cafe in downtown Williamstown, where I could see the office of the law firm where Owen worked. It was a Friday mid-afternoon, but his silver Lexus was missing from its usual spot in the parking lot. I wasn't surprised. According to Aiden, his father had taken a few days off to focus on finding the ill-fated box. Sitting at the table by the window, I sipped my tea and reflected on how quickly my plan had taken effect. Only 5 days ago, Owen had dismissively thrown away my gift, calling it junk. And today, he was ready to turn the whole town upside down to find that junk. The irony of the situation gave me a special satisfaction. The ringing of the phone interrupted my thoughts. It was Lauren, Pearl's friend. Heather, her usually confident voice sounded concerned. Do you know what's going on with Pearl and Owen? She called me late last night, very upset. Something about some jewelry box and papers. Yeah, a little family drama, I answered, trying to sound casual. Owen had thrown away my gift for Pearl, not knowing that it contained copies of documents for some pretty valuable stock. I figured as much. Lauren's voice had a hint of understanding in it. But Pearl said something strange, that you could see Owen throwing the box away, that it was some kind of test. I froze. Pearl was always a smart girl. No wonder she was beginning to suspect my true motives. Interesting theory, I said evasively. And how does she feel about it? She's confused, Heather. Lauren sighed. On the one hand, she's angry at Owen for throwing away your gift, and now she's obsessed with finding the money. On the other hand, she's starting to think that you set this situation up on purpose to cause problems in their marriage. It's a complicated situation, I admitted, neither confirming nor denying her words. Heather, Lauren's voice turned serious. I've known you for years, and I know how Owen has treated you all this time. If this really was some kind of plan, I can't say I don't understand you. Lauren's always been perceptive, and unlike Pearl, she never fell under Owen's spell. Thank you, Lauren, I said quietly. I just want Pearl to see the truth. What truth? She asked cautiously. The truth about her husband, about how easily his mask of loving and caring spouse comes off when it comes to money or status. Lauren was silent for a few seconds, then sighed. I've seen it for a long time, Heather. But Pearl, she's lived with him for so long, changed herself so much to meet his expectations. It's going to be hard for her to admit she was wrong. I know, I said bitterly, but sometimes you have to see something shocking to open your eyes. Be careful, Lauren warned me. Owen isn't the type to take defeat lightly. If he realizes you've been manipulating the situation, he won't be able to prove anything, I assured her. Besides, the documents are really valuable, and I do have them. I just wanted to test how he would react to a gift that he couldn't immediately convert into money or status. And he failed the test, Lauren concluded. With a bang, I confirmed. After talking to Lauren, I decided to take a walk around town. The day was sunny but cool, with a slight breeze that reminded me of the approaching fall. I walked slowly, savoring the moment. For the first time in years, I felt like an active participant in my daughter's life rather than a powerless observer. As I passed the town dump on the outskirts of Williamstown, I noticed a familiar figure. Owen, wearing a suit that must have cost more than the monthly paychecks of most of the town's residents, was talking to the dump workers. Even from a distance, you could see him waving his arms around, his usually impeccable posture broken, his hair disheveled. He looked like a man on edge. I stopped at a safe distance, observing the scene. One of the junkyard workers shook his head, apparently denying some kind of request. Owen pulled out his wallet and began counting out bills. A bribe? I couldn't believe it. Owen Crawford, a respectable lawyer, was trying to bribe the junkyard workers to help him find a discarded jewelry box. I couldn't hold back a smile. The fall was as swift as it was dramatic. Only a week ago, this man had looked down on me as old-fashioned and backward. Now he was rummaging through the trash, desperate to find something he'd thrown away. I decided to stay out of his sight and continued on my way, but the image of Owen in the dump stayed with me. It was the embodiment of the justice I'd been waiting for. When I got home, I found 3 missed calls from Pearl and 1 from Owen. I didn't call back, let them suffer a little longer. Instead, I made tea and settled into my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the garden. The rose bushes I'd pruned recently were already starting to sprout new shoots. Nature always finds a way to regenerate, to recover from pruning. Perhaps the same will happen to my family. Aiden called in the evening, and from him I learned new details about the search for Owen. Grandma? He sounded both annoyed and amused. Dad's gone crazy. You wouldn't believe what he did today. Tell me, I asked, though I already had some idea. He hired a crew of guys to dig up part of the dump, Aiden exclaimed. Paid them a lot of money and promised them a bonus if they found the box. He even went there himself. Can you believe it? Owen Crawford at the city dump. And did they find anything? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Of course not, Aiden snorted. It's a dump. There's tons of garbage. The chances of finding one little box are practically nil. Besides, it's already been tamped down and partially buried. But Dad won't give up. He's always been stubborn, I said. It's not stubborn, Grandma. It's obsessive. Aiden's voice turned serious. I've never seen him like this. He doesn't even go to work these days. He's on the phone all the time, calling some people, trying to find ways to track the trash. He's even contacted a company that uses drones to find things. That's extreme, I said, surprised at the extent of Owen's actions. Exactly, Aiden agreed. And you know what the weirdest thing is? Mom's starting to get mad at you, not at him. At me? I pretended to be surprised, though I'd expected something like that after talking to Lauren. Yeah, she says you could have anticipated Dad's reaction, that you purposely hid copies of the documents in the box, knowing he'd probably be dismissive of it. What do you think of that theory? I asked cautiously. Aiden hesitated for a second, then answered with sudden insight. I think that even if it's true, it's Dad's fault. He threw the gift away without even bothering to look at it properly. He acted like a narcissistic jerk, and now he's paying for it. I felt a surge of pride in my grandson. He was showing more maturity and understanding of human nature at 16 than his father had at 45. That's a wise view, Aiden, I said, but I wouldn't want this situation to cause problems between you and your parents. It's too late, he sighed. They fight all the time. Mom accuses Dad of always being lenient with your gifts. He blames her for not exploring the box thoroughly enough. Emma has already run off to a friend's house. Can't stand the mess. It got me thinking. I wanted to teach Owen a lesson, but I didn't intend to destroy the family. Maybe some things needed to be torn down in order to rebuild on a healthier foundation. Take care of yourself, Aiden, I said softly. And your sister. Sometimes adults act stupid, especially when it comes to money or pride. I know, Grandma, he replied. Emma and I are fine. In fact, It's even fun to watch Daddy get what he deserves. He looked down on everyone for so long, thinking he was smarter than everyone else. Now he's digging through the trash for some jewelry box. After talking to Aiden, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, my plan had worked even better than I'd expected. Owen was completely out of it, his self-confidence and arrogance replaced by panic and despair. On the other hand, I hadn't expected Pearl to start blaming me. That made the situation more complicated. The next morning brought a new turn of events. Pearl showed up on my doorstep unannounced. Her usually impeccable appearance was compromised hair in a sloppy ponytail, minimal makeup, eyes a mixture of fatigue and determination. "We need to talk, Mom," she said as soon as I opened the door. I silently let her into the house. We walked to the kitchen, where I started making tea, an old ritual we observed when we were about to have a serious conversation. "Owen's going crazy over that box," Pearl began, sitting down at the table. "He doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat properly. He's always on the phone or at the dump. I've never seen him like this." "I heard," I said neutrally, putting the kettle on the stove. "Why didn't you tell me about the papers when you gave me the box?" Pearl asked bluntly. "Why was it supposed to be a surprise?" I turned to her, determined to tell the truth, at least a partial one. "I wanted you to discover them on your own, to keep it a little secret between us, like when I used to hide surprises for you in unusual places as a child." Pearl looked at me doubtfully. "But you must have known Owen wouldn't appreciate an antique box. He's always been critical of such things." "Yes," I agreed. I knew he'd probably be dismissive of it, but I didn't expect him to throw it away in front of all the guests. "You didn't?" Pearl raised an eyebrow. "Really, Mother? After all the years you've known each other? After all his comments about your old-fashioned tastes and useless collections?" I sighed, pouring boiling water into the kettle. "Okay, maybe I was allowing for that possibility. But Pearl, isn't that what shows Owen's true colors? How quickly he goes from defiance to panic when he realizes there's money at stake." Pearl was silent, looking at her hands. I could see her struggling with herself, with the loyalty she had developed over the years to her husband. "You did it on purpose," she said at last, looking up at me. "You knew how he would react, and you used it against him. Against us." "Against you?" I shook my head, setting the cups down. "No, Pearl, I did it for you, so you could see who your husband really is." "I know who my husband is," she snapped. "I've lived with him for 20 years, Mother." "And in those 20 years," I said softly, sitting down across from her, "you've gone from a bright, independent girl to a shadow of that man. You've changed yourself to fit his expectations. You've given up your interests, your collections, even part of your personality." Pearl looked like I'd hit her, but I could see that my words had hit the mark. "It was my choice," she said quietly, but without conviction. "Was it?" I poured tea into cups. "Or was it the result of years of manipulation and control? Tell me, Pearl, when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because it conformed to Owen's ideas of how his wife should behave?" She didn't answer, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. It was a rare moment of vulnerability that she almost never allowed herself to show. "It's not fair, Mom," she finally said in a shaky voice, "to use the money to create discord between me and my husband." "I didn't create discord," I countered. "I just unmasked the man who had controlled you for years and alienated you from your family. From me. This is my life." Pearl wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. "You have no right to interfere." "Does Owen have the right to throw away your stuff? Decide who you can socialize with? Dictate how you should dress, speak, live?" She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. a mixture of anger, hurt, and perhaps realization. You don't understand, she said finally. Our marriage, it's complicated. I understand the complexity, Pearl, I replied. But I also understand manipulation and control when I see it. And I've seen Owen gradually isolate you, make you doubt yourself, your decisions, your values. And now what? She asked, her voice tired. You got what you wanted. Owen is in a panic, looking for a box he'll never find. Our house has turned into a battlefield. The kids are avoiding us. Are you happy? I pondered her question. Was I content? Kind of. Seeing Owen get what he deserved was satisfying. But my main goal was to open Pearl's eyes, not just to get revenge. I'll be satisfied when you start living your life, Pearl, I said sincerely. When you stop letting Owen define who you are and what you're worth. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the struggle in her eyes. Then she shook her head. You haven't changed, Mom. You always think you know what's best for me. Don't you? I asked quietly. No, Pearl answered firmly, because you don't see the whole picture. You only see what you want to see. She stood up, leaving the tea untouched. I came here hoping you'd tell me the truth, that you'd admit that you set this situation up on purpose, that it was all an act on your part. And what would that change? I asked. The fact remains that Owen threw away your gift without even bothering to look at it. And now he's looking for it in a panic just because he found out there was money in it. It's not just about money, Pearl countered. It's a matter of principle. He feels you've manipulated him, us, and he's right. A matter of principle? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. What principle, Pearl? His right to control every aspect of your life? His right to decide what's valuable and what isn't? Pearl shook her head, her face tired and disappointed. I'm not going to discuss it, Mother. Just tell me, were you really going to give us those shares? Yes, I answered honestly. Copies of the documents were my way of starting the asset transfer process, but after seeing Owen's reaction, I'm not sure it's a good idea, at least not right now. You're using that money to control us, Pearl said with sudden clarity, just like you accuse Owen of controlling me. It was an unexpected accusation, and it hurt me. Was I really no better than Owen? Was I trying to manipulate Pearl too, only by other means? I'm not controlling you, I countered. I'm trying to protect you, and my assets from a man who I'm sure won't use them wisely. He's my husband, Mom, Pearl said tiredly. And if you can't accept that fact after all these years, then perhaps we'd better keep our distance. With these words, she headed for the exit. At the door, she stopped and turned to me. When you decide you're ready to hand over the documents without games and manipulation, let me know. And she walked away, leaving me with confused feelings. I expected anger, but not this cold disappointment. For the first time, I began to doubt my plan. Maybe I'd gone too far, playing with people's feelings, even if one of them was Owen. But it was too late to back down. The process had been set in motion, and now I could only watch it unfold, hoping it would eventually lead to a good thing for Pearl and my grandchildren. Over the next few days, I received news of the ongoing search for Owen through Aiden. The search at the landfill had been fruitless, and Owen began to expand it by contacting various garbage companies, offering a reward for information on the possible location of the box. He even placed an ad in the local newspaper, promising a large sum of money to whoever found and returned the antique mother-of-pearl encrusted music box. It was all useless, of course. The box was probably already buried deep under tons of trash or destroyed in the recycling process. But Owen didn't give up, his obsession growing daily, fueled by the thought of lost money and possibly hurt pride. This situation couldn't help but affect his relationship with Pearl. According to Aiden, they hardly spoke at all, living as strangers in the same house. Owen was completely absorbed in his search, Pearl in her thoughts and doubts. I watched it all from the sidelines, not interfering, but with mixed feelings. Part of me enjoyed retribution, seeing Owen get what he deserved for years of neglect and control. The other part worried about Pearl and the children who were caught in the middle of this storm. But I had faith that in the long run, it would be good for them. Sometimes you have to go through a painful crisis to see the truth and begin to heal. And I hoped that Pearl would finally see the true face of the man she married and find the strength to regain control of her life. And as for Owen, well, let him look. Let him dig through the trash. Let him waste time and money on a futile search. Let him feel what it's like to be helpless, dependent on other people's decisions and actions. After all, it was only a fair exchange for all the years he'd made me feel that way. 2 weeks passed in a strange lull. I intentionally limited my communication with my daughter's family, only occasionally corresponding with my grandchildren. I learned from Aiden that Owen was still searching for the box, though not as fanatically as he had been at first. Pearl remained aloof, absorbed in her own thoughts. There was a tension in the house, heavy and palpable, like a thunderstorm. Over the days, I'd been thinking a lot about what had happened and what should happen next. Part of me felt doubt. Perhaps I had indeed gone too far, using money as leverage, something Pearl had accused me of. But another part remained convinced that my plan was right. I wasn't aiming to destroy my daughter's family, only to show her who the man she married really was. At the end of the second week, I decided it was time to put an end to this story. It was time to reveal the cards and accept the consequences of my actions, whatever they might be. I called Pearl and suggested we meet, all of us together, her, Owen, Aiden, and Emma, at my house, family council as I called it. Why? Pearl asked warily. What are you up to, Mom? I think we all need to talk, I said calmly, about the box, about the documents, about everything that's happened. I'm ready to clear the air. After a pause, Pearl agreed, though there was doubt in her voice. We made an appointment for the following evening. I had made careful preparations for this meeting. I prepared a light dinner, not too formal, but enough to show that I was serious about it. I laid out the original stock documents on the living room table, the same ones that had been discussed all along. I put on my best dress, a dark blue one with an antique lace collar. I wanted to look dignified when I told the truth. They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, Owen driving, Pearl beside him, the kids in the back seat. I watched from the window as they got out of the car. Owen looked exhausted. His usually flawless appearance was compromised, shadows under his eyes. Pearl seemed detached and tense at the same time. Only Aiden and Emma maintained a semblance of normalcy, though they were more subdued than usual. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Welcome, I said, trying to sound neutral. Come on in. Owen nodded instead of greeting, his gaze cold and assessing. Pearl hugged me awkwardly, but I could feel her tense. Only Aiden and Emma hugged me sincerely, relieved, as if they hoped this meeting would finally put an end to the family drama. We walked into the living room, where I motioned for everyone to sit down. The papers were on the table, in a simple cream-colored folder. I noticed Owen's gaze immediately fixed on it. Before we start dinner, I said, sitting down across from them, I think we need to clear up the stock situation. Owen straightened up, his attention fully focused on me. Yes, that would be wise, he said, trying to sound businesslike and calm, though I could see the impatience in his gaze. First of all, I took the folder and opened it, showing him the documents. I want to confirm that the shares of Penstream Pharmaceuticals do exist and do belong to me. Here are the original documents. I held out the folder to Pearl, but Owen grabbed it first, beginning to look through the papers avidly. His eyes raced over the lines, checking dates, amounts, signatures. I could see the tension fading from his body, replaced by relief and anticipation. "It's okay," he murmured, handing the folder to Pearl. "The documents look authentic." "They are," I confirmed. "Just like I said." Pearl glanced quickly through the papers, then handed the folder back to me. "And what is the current value of these shares?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "The latest estimate is about $420,000, I answered. Penstream has shown steady growth in recent years. I noticed Owen's eyes light up at the mention of the amount, typical reaction of a man to whom money means more than anything else. "Well," he said, coughing politely, "I'm glad we can finally resolve this misunderstanding. Pearl said you intended to give these shares to her as a gift?" "Not exactly." I paused, savoring the moment. "I intended to make the existence of the shares known through copies of the documents I had put in the box. Copies that you, Owen, had so hastily thrown away, calling my gift junk." His face flushed slightly, but he restrained his emotion. "It was an unfortunate misunderstanding, Heather. As I said, I didn't know the contents of the box." "Of course you didn't," I agreed, "because you didn't even bother to look at the gift properly before you threw it away. You made a hasty judgment based solely on the appearance of an item you didn't think had any immediate financial value." Owen clenched his jaws, but remained silent. Pearl looked at me anxiously, clearly fearing a new confrontation. "Mom," she began cautiously, "we're all sorry about what happened, but let's move on. You said you were ready to clear up the stock situation." "Yes," I nodded, straightening up in my chair. "I want you all to know that the box Owen threw away contained only copies of documents. Beautifully designed copies, but copies nonetheless. The originals, I put my hand on the folder. I've always had them, and I'll keep them." There was silence. I could see Pearl and Owen exchanging glances, she concerned, he wary. "What do you mean, stay with you?" Owen asked, his voice becoming strained. "Exactly what I said," I replied calmly. "I'm not going to transfer those shares to anyone anytime soon. They're mine, and I'll decide how and when to dispose of them." Owen blinked, clearly not expecting this. Pearl frowned. "But I thought you said the box was a gift, with papers inside?" She spoke slowly, trying to understand the situation. "The box was a gift," I confirmed, "and the copies of the documents in it were a surprise, yes, but not a transfer of ownership. It was more like, information that I had these assets, and that in the future, when I see fit, I can decide how to dispose of them." "In the future?" Owen interjected, his voice sharp. "But you told Pearl that you wanted to start the process of transferring the assets, that you were getting older and I am getting older." I interrupted him. "But, I'm not going to die anytime soon, Owen. I'm only 73. I'm in good health. I have a clear mind. I'm quite capable of managing my finances." "No one's talking about dying, Heather." Owen tried to speak softly, but I could see the growing irritation in his eyes. "But you're the one who brought up the transfer of assets. Pearl is your only daughter, your heir. It's natural to assume. It's natural for you, Owen, to think about money," I said, not hiding my sarcasm. "But I prefer to think about the best use of what I have. And right now, I'm not sure that giving the stock to you or Pearl is the best solution." Pearl looked like I hit her. "Don't you trust me, Mother?" she asked quietly. "It's not a matter of trust, dear." I softened my tone. "It's about me wanting to decide how I want to manage my assets. Maybe in the future I'll set up a trust for Aiden and Emma. Maybe I'll transfer the shares to you with certain conditions. Or maybe I'll decide to sell them and spend the money on traveling around the world. That's my right. Owen couldn't contain his irritation. This is manipulation, Heather, he said sharply. You led us to believe you were going to give the stock to Pearl. You let me waste 2 weeks looking for the box for nothing. You've been playing us the whole time. Playing with you? I raised an eyebrow. Or just letting you show your true colors, Owen. How easily you went from contempt to desperate search when you knew money was at stake. How quickly you forgot your arrogance and started rummaging through the trash to find what you called junk. I turned to Pearl. And you, dear, instead of thinking about why your husband was treating your mother's gifts the way he did, you started accusing me of manipulation, without even trying to realize that I wanted to show you the true face of the man you were living with. Pearl turned pale, her eyes filled with tears. It's cruel, Mother, she said in a shaky voice, to use money to test people. Cruel? I asked her again. Or just effective? Tell me, Pearl, haven't you seen your husband in a new light these past 2 weeks? Haven't you thought about how easily he loses control when it comes to money or status? She didn't answer, but I could see in her eyes that my words hit the mark. Owen jumped to his feet, his face contorted with anger. That's enough, he exclaimed. I'm not going to sit here and listen to these insults. You deliberately created this situation, Heather, to bring discord into our family. And for what purpose? To prove some point about money and control? You're no better than the people you're judging. I remained calm, looking up at him. Sit down, Owen. We're not done yet. To my surprise, he obeyed, though with apparent reluctance. Perhaps the hope that I would transfer the stock had not yet completely left him. I'm not trying to bring discord into your family, I continued. I'm trying to show you the truth you've ignored for so long, about how quickly your priorities change when it comes to money, about how easily you go from contempt to greed. I turned to my grandchildren, who had been sitting quietly the whole time, watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of shock and perhaps some understanding. Aiden, Emma, I addressed them more gently. I want you to know that these shares exist, that they are valuable, and that someday they will be part of your inheritance. But right now, they're mine, and I'm going to use them as I see fit. Aiden nodded, and I could see understanding in his eyes. Emma looked more concerned, but nodded as well. We understand, Grandma, Aiden said. It's your money, and you have the right to decide what to do with it. Owen gave his son an annoyed look, but he remained silent. Pearl sat motionless, her face pale, her eyes moist from holding back tears. So, I folded my hands in my lap. Now that we've cleared up the stock situation, I suggest we have dinner. I've made a casserole, the one you loved as a child, Pearl. There was an awkward pause. I could see Owen and Pearl exchanging glances, silently conferring. I think we'd better go, Pearl said at last, rising. The kids have school tomorrow and we have a lot to think about. I didn't insist. I had accomplished my goal, the truth had been told, the cards had been dealt. What happened next was up to them. As you wish, I stood up too. But I hope that what happened today will make you think about money, about values, about what's really important in life. Owen was already heading for the door without saying a word. Pearl lingered, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of anger, hurt, understanding, and maybe a glimmer of respect. You've always been stubborn, Mom, she said quietly, but I never thought you could be so— Like what? I asked when she stopped talking. So calculating, she finished, but there was no judgment in her voice, only weariness. I just do what I think is right, I replied. I always do. She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer, then turned to the kids. Aiden, Emma, we're leaving. The grandchildren hugged me goodbye, their embrace sincere despite the tension of the situation. I saw understanding in their eyes, which comforted me. At least they saw the truth, even if their parents had so far refused to acknowledge it. When the door closed behind them, I walked back into the living room and slowly lowered myself into a chair. The file folder was still on the table. I ran my fingers over the spine, feeling a strange mixture of emotions: the satisfaction of being able to finally tell the truth, the regret that it had hurt Pearl, the hope that it would eventually help her see the situation more clearly. I didn't know what would happen next. Perhaps Pearl and Owen would drift further away from me. Maybe this conflict would be the beginning of the end of their marriage. Or maybe they would find a way to reconcile with the truth and build a healthier relationship. But one thing I knew for sure was that I was no longer powerless. I was no longer just an old woman whose opinions and feelings could be disregarded. I had taken back control of the situation and my life. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at Owen's car driving away. Inside, I felt a strange peace. I may have lost my daughter, at least for a while, but I had maintained my dignity and, more importantly, perhaps shown my grandchildren a valuable lesson about money, about manipulation, about the importance of seeing people's true selves behind the masks they wear. I didn't seek reconciliation with Owen. It was impossible after all the years of neglect and control. I wasn't even sure reconciliation with Pearl was possible in the near future, but I was willing to live with the consequences, because for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Free from having to conform to someone else's expectations, free from tacitly accepting neglect, free to be myself, a 73-year-old woman with a sharp mind, my own decisions, and the right to manage my life and my assets as I see fit, and that freedom was worth all the boxes in the world.